Hi there, good afternoon and welcome. My name is Kristen Hillary and I'm a member of the Collaborative Solutions marketing team. I'm excited you're joining us today for our webinar, Cloud on Campus, Maximize Your Technology Investment with Change Management and Training. Before we get started, I'd like to go over just a few quick housekeeping items. All participants are in listen-only mode and you'll be muted throughout the webinar. We do welcome your questions and we'll definitely save time for a Q&A at the end. So please go ahead and submit your questions as we go. You can do that through the GoToWebinar chat box. Before we dive in, I'd just like to take a second to introduce my colleague, Angela Watts, who will be presenting today's webinar. Angela has been with Collaborative Solutions for 6.5 years, and she spent the last 2 as our Director of Organizational Change and Training. She has deep experience leading transformative change management projects for higher ed institutions, including the University of Southern California, University of Chicago, the University of Texas at Austin, and University Nevada, Las Vegas, as well as others. Angela, at this point, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you so you can get us started and introduce our guest speakers.
Terrific. Thank you, Kristen. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for joining us today. I have 4 exceptional panelists who are part of today's conversation. I'm actually standing in Rachel's office. Rachel Levy is the manager of Workday Support Services at the University of Southern California. She and I worked together on, it was my very first project 6.5 years ago. We like to joke that Workday years are like dog years, so we've both been doing Workday for a very long time. We also have together in one office at the University of Texas at Austin, Claire Knaut, who is their Workday Campus Readiness Program Director, and Laura Marshall, who is the HCM Payroll Program Director, but also worked with me previously at the University of Chicago, where Laura was part of the implementation team and was their training lead. So she's going to speak to some unique challenges we faced at Chicago. And then lastly, we have Brian Steen. Brian is the manager of Workday Training Lead at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. They went live in October, and we are still currently actively engaged in some training activities on campus there that he is going to speak to as well. So we'd like to start by telling you a little bit about Collaborative Solutions, who we are, and a little bit about our organizational change and training practice for those of you who have not worked with us in the past. We will then go into defining what is exactly change management. Then we're going to look at ways to maximize your Workday investment with things like project branding, communications, training, end-user adoption, and sustainment activities. And then we'll get to the star of the show, our case studies from the University of Chicago, UNLV, USC, and the University of Texas at Austin. And then we'll wrap up. We'll try to save about 15 minutes for some questions. So who is Collaborative Solutions? We are one of Workday's longest tenured partners with more than 350 customers globally. I think we're most proud of what you see there in that green box, the 98% customer satisfaction rating. That is actually a Workday-driven statistic that comes from when they interview customers post-go live. I think the other number that jumps out at me from this infographic is the 30% more experience per consultant compared to the average in the ecosystem. And I think that that's a credit to those workplace awards that you see at the bottom of the page. We take a lot of pride in how we treat our own employees as well as our customers. And so we have a lot of long tenured employees like myself who've been with Collaborative and in the Workday ecosystem, some as early as Workday version 3. So people have been around for a really long time. Our organizational change and training practice, we're fully in-house. Workday is all that we do. But I think when I think about differentiators, what makes us different than our competitors, it's that 4th bullet. Everyone in our team is Workday certified in at least HCM or financials. We also have consultants who hold additional certifications in certain modules like Workday Learning, Workday Student, Recruiting, Absence, Time Tracking. And it's really that expertise that allows us to partner with our functional team the way that we do and really drive training in unique ways as well. All right, so that's who we are. What is it that we do? We herd cats. That's the short version. We actually had a video. If you guys have never seen the herding cats video, it's worth going to YouTube and spending 2 or 3 minutes. Rachel, I'll actually give you credit. She found it a couple of years ago, and it's something that we've spoken to a lot. Webinar wasn't agreeing with us today, so we decided to go with the photo. But it really is about taking people with different personalities, different priorities, different objectives, and driving them all to use Workday the way you're designing it, so we're driving everyone to one end goal. So what that means from a more practical standpoint is change management is the people side of the project. It's the people side of change. And I think this is particularly important in the higher ed space because we have a lot of longer tenured employees in higher ed. And so it's something that typically, the more longer tenured an employee, the more resistant they are to change. So I tell people all the time, if Collaborative implements you for Workday, we're going to pay your people correctly on day one. And obviously that's vastly important, right, to everyone. But at the end of the day, if your users aren't using the system the way you've designed it, then you don't really have true project success. So you have to understand the individual fear that comes with implementing a new system, with making a big change. I was visiting with 3 different colleges down in Florida last week, and one of the things that got said was, we've got people on campus who are afraid they're going to lose their jobs. And that's not at all reality, but it's a fear.
Yes, and this is Rachel. I can actually pipe into that, too. That was the #1 rumor floating around, that somehow Workday was the kitchen of the future that was in the 50s little newsreels that you'll say, it slices, it dices, it makes julienne fries, it's self-cleaning, it does shopping for you, whatever it is, it does it. So therefore, you do not need people anymore. We took the people out of the HR. No more humans in human resources, which is absolutely false. Right. And honestly, to be brutally honest, if anything, it actually created jobs, because I can just speak for USC. The system that we came from was DOS-based, and it was an accounting system. So we weren't keeping track of the things that we should have been keeping track of. Mm-hmm. So it actually created more work to do things properly.
Thanks, Rachel. Mm-hmm. So how do we do this? We build our methodology around ProSci, which is the industry leader in change management. And I look at this, this preparing your campus for change, managing them through it and reinforcing it, really how you align that to the stages of the Workday project. So during plan and during architect is when you should be preparing for change. This is when you're defining your change management strategy, you're gathering your team, and you're really making sure that you've got executive sponsorship and that is visible and active so that people are starting to build awareness and get some excitement around the transition that will happen. During configure and prototype and during test is where you're implementing those things. You're doing your change impact analysis, so you're looking at your various stakeholder groups. What is their current state? What is their future state? What is that delta? How are we going to mitigate any risks? You're creating your communication plan. You're creating your training needs assessment and training curriculum plan. All of those things are happening sort of during the meat of the project, and this is when you begin taking actions on that as well. And then finally, reinforcing the change. Training comes during the deploy stage and even some post-production. We're going to talk today through various ways to manage some training. But this is when you are doing that just-in-time training. You're getting feedback as you go. And then, we're really celebrating our successes. And we're looking at any areas where we struggle. And we're going to continue to keep communicating and training to those things. So how do you manage a big, complex change like a huge Workday deployment? I think the best way to look at this, I know this page is a little overwhelming, look at that top line first. To successfully achieve change, you have to have vision, you have to have skills, you have to have incentives, the right resources, and an action plan. Without a vision, there's confusion. Why are we even doing this? Why is the campus spending, this much of an investment on Workday? Why is it happening? If you have vision but you don't have the skills, you have anxiety, because people are afraid that they're not going to be able to do their job once you go live on Workday. The incentives come in with the sort of what's in it for me portion. Why do I care? Why do I want to be a champion of this change? Because without incentives, you've got resistance. Without the right resources, whether that is job aids, webinars, videos, ongoing communications, without those things and the right people to reach out to know who to go to, there's frustration on the end user's part. And then without an action plan, of course, you're going to have a lot of different false starts. So looking at all of those together, this is why I think it's very important to start talking about change management and communication and training before you even kick off your implementation is important. Okay, so now we're going to dive into maximizing your Workday investment, talking here through project branding and communications. I love project branding. It makes me very excited. I think it's useful for a lot of reasons, but one of the key things for me is, in addition to building that awareness and excitement and getting people something to sort of rally around, you are going to continue to have training and updates through your experience with Workday. Right now, those updates are twice a year, but also there's things that are rolled out on Fridays. You might add a new module. There's going to be continual need for communication and training. And so having something that is distinct and that people can rally around, I think is really beneficial. This is just a sample of some of the things we've seen. As I think you might notice, some people want to use Workday in their brand. The one in the middle, that simple, easy, intuitive, that was the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Their CEO actually drove that mission because he wanted those 3 words, but he wanted this all based around Workday. We've had other people like the Creating a Culture of Leadership, that was QVC. They were using Workday as their tool, but they were, as a company, were really focused on leadership competencies in talent management. So these are just some examples of the way people have used branding. My favorite is what I think has become very popular. We've seen it ourselves with dozens of customers now, is the 3-tier approach. What this is a tagline that you can rally around during the implementation, 1 at go live, and 1 6 months post or after you've done your phase 2, whenever you're in your sort of evergreen state. We'll give all the credit on this top one to the people at the University of Chicago. They created this brand. And Laura, do you want to speak to just sort of how that was received on campus?
Yeah, so we used this during our implementation, the blue being sort of, we're still discovering, and campus will, as it was being rolled out, we were going out and doing information sessions with campus, getting them gradually introduced to Workday. And then as we were going live, we did a lot of communications, and I'll talk a little bit more about what those look like in a few minutes, but we changed our branding to this gold color. So Discover Workday, we wanted to get people acclimated with going in, employees used to looking and changing their personal information in Workday rather than going through the old way of doing things. And then I think after actually I left the University of Chicago, the intent was for them to switch over to the Have a Nice Workday. So Workday is now ingrained in our daily day-to-day operations. It's no longer a new thing, it's what we're used to. So that was the intent with going with this 3-tiered approach.
And I think part of the reason it's so popular is that that whole notion of Discover Workday, you don't expect people to be experts at day one. Even though we did tons of training together, you and I, Laura, we didn't expect people to know everything on day one, and so it's sort of giving them that assurance that they were still learning as they were going too, and they weren't expected to be experts right out of the gate. All right, so communications. Number one thing I hear people say after projects is that they should have communicated earlier and more, right? Tell what you know when you know it. You don't have to know all of the information to start telling people some information. I think one of the biggest fears on the campus is the rumor mill. So people start hearing, you have a big project implementation team, people are going to know what's happening. So then that becomes fearful, and there's these rumors that start to get circulated. So people want to know, they want to hear that's what's in it for me, why is this going to benefit me? And I think that that's a real challenge across big campuses. Rachel, there's some samples we have here from USC when you guys went live and what you do today. You want to tell everybody a little bit about these?
Sure. So a little bit of background on USC is we have been live since December of 2013. So we're in a little bit different life cycle than the other universities on this call. But we had extensive pre-Workday communication, which you can see to the left-hand side. Also, it's very important to note that we were decentralized. So some of the communication, again, it's like herding cats because each school or department kind of had their own way of doing things. So this was very challenging. We had extensive training. So what we did is we organized users into security groups. Once we went through our discovery phase of how Workday works and how we want people to transact, then sort of bifurcating them into what we considered the security group. And we did many playbacks of the business processes that we were developing for these concerned groups. The transactors or the field users were involved in user acceptance testing. And we did training by cohort. So not only did we have it by the security role, but we also did it by academic versus administrative units. Because obviously, you know, an academic unit does not have to, or an administrative unit doesn't have to deal with faculty, which is a whole enchilada by itself. We developed a lot of quick reference guides, and we have a Workday help website where those quick reference guides are housed. We have videos explaining how supervisory orgs work, how security roles work, self-service videos for managers and things like that, and users, like how do I update my benefits, how do I change my contact information. And then, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later in my section of the case study, we do an internal conference called Workday Palooza, which we'll talk about, which is our ongoing inspiration and organization. And then what you see here on the screen to the right is the Workday Download, which is every 2 weeks we put this out, which is basically an update on information about Workday. Like, hey, we've noticed people are using the wrong reason for XYZ. A little bit of information. Here's a tip for you. This one in particular is actually we located a bug, which we will get back to them on fixing. So again, communicate, communicate, communicate. Yep.
There we go. And Brian, I know you developed Word on Workday, and you guys are using this actively at UNLV. You want to talk a little bit about the messaging you do in this one?
Absolutely. So I'll sort of give some background on the UNLV project a little bit later in the discussion, but Word on Workday really has become our weekly effort to get information to our campus users from all aspects of the project. So we use this as a way to communicate any type of configuration changes that are going to have an impact to campus. We talk about policy and procedure items that are related to Workday, but can be very specific to areas of human resources or finance, budget, payroll, grants, purchasing, and so on. We've also started to really use this communication as a way to hedge off some of the resistance that we've experienced on campus since Go Live. One of those examples being something that we entitle, or a section of this communication that we title, You Said, We Did. And this is where we take feedback from our campus users and pop it directly into this communication and say, here are the things that we're hearing about this project implementation, and here's how your feedback has shaped our support model. We've also introduced what we call our Workday Champion Highlights as part of this newsletter, where we identify persons across campus that are really making an impact related to the Workday implementation and have become real change champions for us. And we use that to talk about obstacles that they're experiencing, but not only identify those obstacles, but they're also providing best practices to overcome those obstacles for their specific units. And it really serves as a great way for the campus to know every single week they're getting a consistent message about the Workday implementation. It puts everyone on the same page, but it also allows us to really effectively manage some of the pain points that we know we're experiencing on campus.
Thank you, Brian. Okay, we're going to shift gears from branding and communications. Again, we're happy to take any questions you guys have at the end. You can enter them in the chat box. But moving to training, and training considerations specific to higher ed. So I think there's a lot of things that you need to start considering early on so that you come up with the correct training strategy and plan. One of the things is, Rachel referenced is, are you centralized or decentralized? How different do your different campuses or your different schools that might be going into one Workday instance, or even the colleges, how differently do they do things, and how are we going to speak to those?
Right, and this is Rachel, and I'm going to pipe in here. During the last Workday Rising, I was a reference for collaborative solutions, and there were several schools that I talked to who were on a system. And one of the things, and I don't know that I know the answer to this because I think it's unique and different for every organization, is there is a sweet spot between letting people have a voice and saying, I think it works best this way, and laying down the law, saying, no, the higher BP is going to be this. And so there has to be, when you were talking about disparate organizations within your bigger organization, letting them have a voice. But if you do everything on committee, you will never, ever, ever go live, right? And maybe we did it a little too hard the other way, where we said the BP will be this, and, you know, maybe we should have re-examined that.
A little more
So
flexibility.
don't
yeah.
do what we did. Try to find the sweet spot.
Yeah, thank you. Also looking at your policies, I mean, I think, Laura, you and I can speak to this from our days in the UChicago training room, but we're trained as much to policy and why decisions were made and how they were going to be done as we did teaching people how to use it in the Workday system. So I think really understanding the policies and why decisions are being made and making sure your trainers understand that, because those are the #1 questions you get in a classroom or policy related, that's important to do. We also encourage, I like to call it a collaborative, we call it UET. So for those of you who have been working with Workday, you do know that UAT, user acceptance testing, is a part of the methodology. It is something that still has to be signed off by the core team, right? What I like to do is bring in true end users who've not been a part of any discussion, not a part of the project team, who are just going to experience the system. So we bring them in for user experience testing. They pilot training materials, we get that feedback, and we learn which things they really pick up quickly and which things might require more training or even like instructor-led training. Other things to consider, I think we've touched on this a bit earlier, but how are you going to group the people you're training? Do you have different sets of the population who deal with staff hires versus faculty hires versus student workers? And are you going to train those individually? I think if you're also going full platform, there's even more to consider, because there tend to be more stakeholders on the financials side of the house than even on the HCM side. So really starting to get your arms around how you're going to group people from the very beginning is important. Fake data or real data, we've done this both ways. I think there's pluses and minuses to each. Laura, I know at Chicago we used fake data. I know that in your opinion you would do that differently moving forward. Can you speak a little just to your thoughts on which is the best approach?
Sure. So my opinion on this is really based on my experience with the training we did at UChicago, in which we did we prepped data for, oh my goodness, probably about 300 different supervisory organizations. So what that essentially means is 300 different sets of data so we could train that many people. So each person had their own data set to work with. The time it took to get all of that prepared was immense. And whereas with a real sort of data population, you have it all prepared for you for the most part. There are some things that you still need to tweak. You still want to be sure that the data that you're looking at is homogeneous, or at least to the extent that it can be homogeneous between all the different trainers and trainees in the classroom. So you don't want one person in the classroom doing a transaction on a postdoc and another person doing a transaction on a student necessarily. You probably want your people to be doing, your trainees to be doing the same type of transaction. So to that extent, using real data can sometimes be a little bit tricky, but just the time it takes to prepare that fake data, a lot of work has to go into it every time. So, and from a security perspective, if you're training somebody, you're gonna want to assign them the role that they are going to be in when they're actually in production, when they're doing their jobs. And so the real data lends itself much more to making sure that they have that experience while they're in the training classroom.
Awesome, thank you. And the last consideration we have is just who are your trainers going to be? I do think it's helpful and important to have somebody in the training classroom who is Workday certified. You are always going to have some snags when it comes to security, or maybe you've got somebody who's new to the university and wasn't part of our data set that we thought we were going to be training, and we've got to get them loaded in the system. So I strongly encourage having at least one person in the room who can do things behind the scenes in Workday, push through approvals and other things to help you as you go. Claire, I know this is still in flight for you guys. You're still during implementation, but I know you've started already looking at your training curriculum and training plan. Can you speak a little bit about your thoughts and what direction you guys are going at the University of Texas at Austin?
Yeah, I mean, very early on in the project, we started getting the questions, how much training are my people going to need, and are you going to have good training? And so you start getting those questions very, very early. So doing the training needs analysis is very helpful. When we first started with it, because we are going to make some organizational alignment changes in several of our units, where they're going to centralize a little bit more, it was really more difficult at the beginning. So in working with our stakeholders, our training needs analysis at the beginning, you know, we had so many users. I mean, so many to train, it was overwhelming. But then as we worked with them a little bit more to understand the roles, our numbers get better and better and more precise, and actually they'll continue to get more precise up until we actually execute the training. But doing the training needs analysis is really helpful because it started to, give us numbers, right, preliminary, and that leads into your plan, your training strategy and your training plan. Because once we got the numbers, we found out we have something like 4,000 managers who are going to need to know how to approve timesheets. I can't possibly get 4,000 managers into an instructor-led training program. So that's one where we had to then think about, well, how are we going to reach them? So we're going to put some online resources for them and do some road shows with them and be sure that we have plenty of support for when they've got to approve those timesheets for that first period. And so it really led us to understand, too, in looking at, say, we have for our roles, we have an HR analyst, an HR partner, and an HR executive. As we began to talk to the units about these different roles, it became apparent that all three of these roles at some point might initiate a process. So when we look at that, then it means in terms of grouping, which I think you talked about, who are you going to group together, then we're grouping these three roles together and setting out their curriculum. It's all the same for all three roles because they all need to know how to do the same things. So the training needs analysis is so important, and like I said, that really leads us to understand how many folks we've got to train, and then to develop a really, for each one of these courses, then figuring out what the curriculum plan is, outlining each one of those courses. And as you can see from this example, then figuring out how much time we're going to need from them so that they can plan appropriately. And also so we can figure out our logistics, because I don't know about the rest of you, but we don't have tons of wonderful computer training rooms all over campus that are available to us. There's wonderful classrooms out there, but they're not available for administrative staff to do training. So having this data early on so that we can get the logistics and reserve the rooms, and just figure out how many classes we need to have concurrently, and how many trainers then we're going to need. So all this planning up front is really helpful, and it makes campus feel so much better that you have actually answers to how many courses they're going to take, when is it going to occur, and if we're going to be able to get everybody through.
Yep. Awesome. Thank you. This is just a sample of an instructor-led training agenda that Laura and I led at the University of Chicago, starting with core concepts and then really business process driven. I think the two things that I'll point out is, one, the word activities, right? You want to get your people that you're training in the system as much as you can. They don't just want to see a demo. They don't benefit from that the way they do when you have activities that they're doing transactions in the system. So that's something you should have as much of as possible. And then sort of the knowledge check. We played a lot of Jeopardy in Chicago. We did it here too at USC. But just making sure that people it gives them that confidence that they really do know the answers to these questions, and so they start to really come on board with what they've learned. And then lastly, because I want to jump to these case studies, looking at user adoption and sustainment, I think it's important to use what's available in the tenant, the in-system guided tours and help text for that just-in-time training. I think it's important to consider sort of 200-level deep dive trainings for post-go live. When you identify those people on campus that are really going to be your super users and who can help train others throughout the campus and the university, and then having those resources available that people can access. And then lastly, some tips and tricks. I mean, I think one of the big ones here is establishing the process for enhancements and reporting requests. You are not going to have all the reports in Workday that you need when you go live. Those requests will start coming in immediately. So finding a process for how that's going to be handled. If you do have, your ticketing system, how are you going to prioritize what needs to be built post go live, I think is something. And then the last one, celebrate successes. I mean, this is a big win. There's a reason you guys are going to Workday. And so being able to sort of continue that excitement and enthusiasm around what this will bring and the access and the ease of data are things to focus on. All right, with that, I want to jump into the case studies so everybody can talk a little bit about the specific challenges they face, things that they're doing, ideas to share. Laura, again, you're at the University of Texas now, but you were at Chicago, and we're going to have you talk through what we did there.
Sure, thank you. So at Chicago, we were an 18-month implementation that had a January 1st of 2015 go live. So We were actually planning to roll out training and have it ready to go in October. We would train October, November, December, and then through go live into January. We ended up bringing, actually partnering with Collaborative at towards more the end of October. We ended up being able to get ready for training to start being deployed right before Thanksgiving. So we worked fast and furiously to get all of our training, PowerPoint presentations ready, the methodology that we wanted to use. We actually did role-based training, so we're doing HR partners in one class and academic HR partners in the other. If you held both roles, then we would just have you come to the academic HR partner class. So that kind of speaks to a lot of the logistics that Claire was referencing earlier. Do not underestimate the logistics. They are so critical, because if your trainees don't have a positive experience just with the administrative part of it, then they're already going to be flustered and frustrated coming into a classroom, and you don't want that. While I'm on the topic of logistics, treats, candy, coffee, anything that you can provide in the classroom is going to go a long way. So that really, I think, that helped us. So what we did at Chicago was we had about 400 participants we had to get trained. We did about 6 weeks prior to go live and then 6 weeks after go live. So we continued at the same rigorous pace after go live with people that we didn't quite get to train before we went live. So the classes were separated by roles. The more hands-on roles like HR partner, those had about, I think it was a 2-day course actually per person, whereas the roles that didn't have as much touching in Workday, they had maybe a half-day course. So we did make sure that they had, we were using prepped data, so it was fake data. They had access to their organizations, and so one of the advantages that I didn't speak to earlier about the prep data was that we used the same name, but just with a different number after. So that made it a little bit easier to follow along. But again, just the context, the real-life scenarios just weren't as prevalent as they would have been with the real data. So after we went live, in addition to continuing that rigorous training schedule, we also made sure that we had these open labs, and basically that was an opportunity for people to come with their work and get through real work. And then we also had mobile units. Mobile units were where we went out into the colleges and the departments, and we made sure that they had laptops, and we came to them. And that allowed them to kind of just step away briefly from their desk. Some of them just had 1 or 2 things they wanted to ask us about. Others would bring a whole stack of paperwork. They were ready for us to really help them get through all of their business processes. That was very, very intense, especially before that first January monthly payroll. At Chicago, the majority of our employees were paid on the monthly cycle, so that was the big one. So we needed to make sure that we touched every single college and department on campus ahead of that payroll deadline. That was our first objective after go live. After that first sort of stabilization phase, although we were still stabilizing, we made sure that we did these 200 level courses that focused more deep into some of the subject matter, so that we could start to have these super users, and you see that at the bottom of on the left there. We had these super user sessions that really focused on that deep content, more than just how to hire somebody, but I think on the academic side, there's a lot of nuances, there's a lot of things that you just need to know that you don't need to know on the staff side, and so we focused on that as well. So this picture here is of our support schedule. This was what we referenced for the 6 months after go live. This was our life. So as you can see, we were in the biological sciences division, and then we had another person in the president's and provost's office, and then we had another person that was coordinating an open lab. And so then we might have some that we said, okay, well, we know that we have some people that want very, very specific guidance, so we would have the ability to actually schedule an appointment with us. So that was a very coordinated effort. We had a lot of administrative support, so I will say that administrative support is very, very important as you're going through this, because we were traveling all over campus. It was January in Chicago, so it wasn't exactly warm. So it helped to have people with cars, trucks that could kind of help us when we needed to load laptops, things like that. So the other picture you see there is of our Go Live checklist. We had this for employees, so as we were going live and they were coming back from New Year, we were able to get this communication out to everybody to say, Workday's live, go in and check on your emergency contacts. make sure your direct deposit looks the way you want it to look. Check out your personal information, your benefits. This is the new HR payroll system, so this is what you should be getting used to. And then we had the same kind of thing for our HR partners. Those individuals, or the HR partner type roles, those individuals were already exposed to Workday. They had been engaged throughout the implementation, but for them it was a go in and make sure, run a report of all the employees within your unit. This is how your reporting is going to start to look. So we had a go live checklist for them as well, and that was all sent out, very well coordinated by our communications team.
Excellent. Thank you.
All right. Oh, so I'm going to hand it off to Brian now. Sorry, Angela.
No, that's good. Thank you, Laura.
Thanks, Laura. So just to give you guys a little bit of background about UNLV's project and UNLV. So we belong to the Nevada System of Higher Education, which includes 9 universities and institutions, some of those being community colleges and state colleges around the state. The objective, or the project for us, was wrapped into the NSHE project, or the Nevada System of Higher Ed project, and the goal was for a go live of October 1st, 2017, and we went with pretty full in with finance, HCM, and payroll all on the same date. As you can imagine, that was a pretty complex project to take on to begin with, but we also experienced some significant changes on our campus for training and change management leadership about 3 months prior to go live. So we found ourselves in what I describe as being a chaotic situation of sorts, that we were 3 months away from the system being implemented and having to revisit our game plan for training and communications and change management. So while the pre-go live efforts were not, I think, as flushed out as we would have liked them to be, we joined with Collaborative Solutions in an engagement with them to really talk about, it seemed that a ship has sailed related to pre-go live activities. What can we do to get our campus ready and so that they're able to best utilize this product? And so Collaborative, I think, put feet on the ground right at the beginning of September, about 1 month prior to go live. We started with some initial trainings related to Workday basics for our managers. We got our executives in a room to talk them through and let them experience what Workday will mean for their world, which really ended up being how do they delegate tasks and review their inbox items. But then we started talking about this support model post-go live and what that looks like and what shape that should take on. And we got to this open lab state where, as Laura mentioned, campus users are able to bring their work with them and really get some over-the-shoulder assistance in completing their daily tasks. We approached it by having segmented times for finance support and then HCM support, so that way we could make sure we had Workday certified professionals in the room from Collaborative, and then we had our own campus SMEs in the room because, as you can imagine, policy and procedure are a natural part of some of the questions that we were receiving. We've gone through that, and we're actually still in our open lab phase. Those will continue through the month of December, but we have really found that to be a beneficial support for our campus. Actually, we have people who I think just sort of set shop there. They bring a binder and they pretty much work from our labs for most days, so we're now at a state where we're trying to get them more comfortable with the thought of working from their desk and using some of the resources that they have available to assist them. The labs have also served as a great opportunity for us to get a good handle of what the campus is really talking about and the type of processes they're experiencing challenges with. And then we then turn that into items that we discuss in our Workday, Word on Workday communications that I talked about a little bit earlier, and we've used that to develop our 200-level deep dive sessions that we've been facilitating to campus. And those sessions have included things such as reporting and recruitment and period activity pay. And we're now in a transitional phase where we're starting to look at the open labs as targeted open labs. So based on the demand of our campus and knowing what's coming ahead, for example, we know that our spring part-time instructors need to get paid, or the transactions to get them paid are about to begin. So we're offering targeted labs on period activity pay. We'll do 2 of those through the month of December. We've offered a couple of webinars and Q&As related to period activity pay. all with the thought of offering training and resources to the campus based on their needs or what we know is happening. Some additional things we've done post-go live outside of Word on Workday in these open labs and some of these 200-level courses have included focused labs for our office campus sites, such as our School of Medicine and our dental practice. And then we've tried to give job aids that our campus users can better utilize that incorporate some policy and procedure and screen clicking. What we found is that people, they can get they gain a level of comfort with where to click, but they can sometimes be challenged in knowing which process to use in which situation, and that's something that we've really tried to answer via Word on Workday and our job aids. So yeah, our story, I think, was a little bit more chaotic than what some may have experienced, but we've definitely, in a post-go live world, have been able to come up with great strategies to help contribute to our campus's readiness for the Workday tool. And I think with that, I am turning it over to Rachel.
Thanks, Brian. Hi, my name is Rachel Levy. My current title is Manager of Workday Support Services. My subtitle is the Workday Police. I basically audit HCM transactions to make sure that they're not only legally compliant, but compliant with the policies of the university. And I am a former compensation analyst, senior compensation analyst, and I was the SME on the HCM and compensation components of Workday. And I came by my new job, honestly, because when we went live in December of 2013, things unexpected, as they are always, because you never can plan for every situation that happens. We needed somebody who could look at the business process forensically and figure out what happened, what needs to change, how to correct it, and that sort of thing. And so because I do enjoy a good puzzle and a spreadsheet, I got sucked into Workday, and so I'm no longer in compensation, but I'm in Workday. So as I stated before, we went live in December 2013. We went live with HCM, payroll, benefits, absence, core comp, and then we sort of soft rolled out talent slightly after that. And then in more recent years, we adopted time tracking and recruiting. So what I'm talking to you about is the sustainment activities, and we have an event that we do, which is an internal conference for our transactors called Workday Palooza. I did come up with the name, but I did not come up with the idea. I'd love to take credit for it, but it was actually suggested in 2015 by our Chief Human Resources Officer, Janice McEldowney, and she wanted an event that we could bring everybody back together after the frenzy of training and being live for, at that point, about a year and a half. It was supposed to be an event to inspire, educate, and reinvigorate field users' interactions in Workday. We've had 3 of them so far. So we've had 2015, 2016, and we just did 2017 in October. And what you're looking at on this screen is you are looking at the agenda or the major topics that we covered in October 2017. It's done by a committee, and we also poll the users to see what they feel like they might need help with. But again, as the Workday Police, I come up with a lot of stuff because I think people are not doing things quite correctly. So I come up with items that I think they should. And so I do love that we are all basically saying the same thing. So you see the bullet point, which is the 4th one down. What reason should I use? That was actually our game show, which I highly recommend game shows. They're very fun. What it was is that we had questions that we had an interactive, this was a very interactive portion of it, where people could answer from their smart devices, so from a laptop or a phone or whatever. So no one is called out to feel stupid if they got it wrong, but you can immediately see the polling on which answer was A, B, or C, and that sort of thing. And I think Angela can pipe up about that because she actually attended not this year's but last year's.
Yeah, in 2016, the game that they did was edit position or change job, and they, host it like a game show, and it was a scenario, and which business process would you use? You could use either, but what does the university want you to do, and how do they want you to do it? And so I loved seeing the interaction with the audience, with you guys as the panelists, to really give that feedback, because you could tell they were learning as they went too. They weren't doing everything right, but they were learning.
And the game show questions all came honestly by mistakes that I actually saw. Yeah. And I think most importantly, it's not what answer is it, but why? And so that's the other important, it shouldn't be arbitrary. This is the reason why we do this. So you can see what the agenda topics are. And we did this year, we did a Stump the Experts panel, which was pretty fun too. So, and then I'm going to show you the next slide, which will probably change your opinion of me. So hold on just one second. Okay, so this is the Workday Palooza very first one. So, you know, Angela said to me once, she's like, this is great, but not everybody has you. So this is what I bring to the table. I'm a little weird and come up with bizarre things to teach people. So what you're looking at here is my partner in crime, Sarah, is the one with the cell phone taking a selfie. She is quite possibly the kindest human being on the planet, and she trained every single end user. So she was responsible for all of the training. And so the first year, I had laid out a whole bunch of options and to Janice, our CHRO, and I said, well, we could make a funny video about what not to do. And she's like, yes, okay. And so I wrote this movie, which was like whopping 5 minutes long, where Sarah was bad Sarah, doing everything wrong, using paper, running around getting signatures instead of just using the business process. And it's taken on a life of its own. So every year we have a little like 5-minute movie. And then I introduced a superhero character, the Cleaner Shrimp, which is what I'm dressed as in that picture, who is the arch nemesis of Bad Sarah. And speaking of branding, as we were coming into the room to have this presentation, somebody said to me, hey, Cleaner Shrimp, as I walked past them. So I branded myself. And also we do things like we do live action events to help with understanding, because people learn differently. Yeah. Not everybody learns by rote transactions. Not everybody learns by reading things. Sometimes people need something else. And so I did a presentation on how supervisory orgs work, and I used a lasso as a demonstration of what a supervisory org is, and the person holding the lasso is the manager. So that's what that ridiculous picture is. So the topics really range from what could we do better, what we're working on, clarification of processes, and updates. That's sort of the content, the basic content of Workday Palooza. And then we found lots of success in case studies, and the example I'm going to give you is the renaming of supervisory orgs. So when we went live, due to the very antiquated system that we went to, and I know a lot of you are experiencing the same pain, it was a DOS-based system that was homegrown and basically an accounting system. So it did nothing but accounting, and it did that very well, but nothing else. So when we went live, our supervisory org names weren't great. And prior to going live, because I was in a lot of these sessions, I would tell people, once we go live, you can ask us to update these names to something valuable, and giving them examples of what would be a valuable name for a supervisory org. Well, guess what? It's 3 years later, and still the orgs do not look wonderful. So I had the idea to actually ask one of the big users in one of the departments if they would do a case study. And she did a case study on the advantages to renaming the orgs and the effect that it has on recruiting and how people apply for jobs and search for things. And lo and behold, we got tons of requests to update the org. I could have set myself on fire, tap dancing, saying the same thing over and over again, and no one would have listened to me. However, when a peer says it, that somehow has different impact. So that's something to note for your post-go-live communications and your sustainment. We also found that the Workday video, which I described to you before, is very, very popular. I'm not sure anybody learns from it, but they certainly enjoy it. So, and then the game show, as we discussed, the interactivity of it helps people learn. And then we do a live action demonstration, because again, people learn differently. So I had not everybody figured out supervisory orgs, but I had at least a handful of people, which was a handful more than we had before, come up to me and say, oh gosh, now I understand supervisory orgs. So what we've learned, AKA what could we do a little bit better, interactive is better. So instead of talking to people, having people do things with you is always going to be better. And a shorter day is better. For the past 3 times, or 2.5 times I should say, they have been all-day events, which is a lot to ask for your super users to take an entire day off. And it's hard to schedule because you have to get it between payroll cycles and the start of semesters and various and sundry other items. So shorter is indeed better. And also, just because people attend doesn't mean that they retain. So we post the presentations on our Workday Health site, and we're in the process of considering recording the sessions, although we don't want to stream them because we want people to actually attend in person. So, so if anyone has any questions specifically about the event, you please reach out to me via email or how I audit, anything like that, because you should always, climb on the back of people who have done it before you, and we're very collegial about that. So if anybody has any questions. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Claire Knaut to talk about the University of Texas at Austin.
Hi, this is Claire. We've had kind of an interesting history here. When we first started off our program, we were going to do a phased approach. Then we found out how hard it might be to bridge to our financial system, so we shifted gears and said, oh, we think we'll do a big bang. Then we saw how much change that was going to take on the financial side of the house, and we have now gone back to deciding that we are doing a phased approach. So you can imagine with our campus, from a change perspective, it's been interesting to keep people engaged with us on that ride. But now that we're less than a year away from go live, it's getting real. And it's been really helpful to be able to give them more specific things and plans, as it mentions the training strategy, confirming the design, so that they really see what's coming. And one of the things that was really hard for us early on was when we first started, we actually had our president in flux, our CFO in flux, our provost in flux, and 4 deans in flux. So executive sponsorship, when we first started, was very, very difficult, and it's just really hard to get a campus on board when you don't have your executives speaking to such a big, significant program. Those things eventually got worked out. We now have stable executives and deans for the most part. The deans still seem to move around a little bit. And so now you'll see, in terms of our communications, it's been really important and really great to have our president speaking to this program is something that's important. And in fact, even talking about the importance of standardization, because that's a key component to this program. So I would be sure that you involve your executives, get their support early, and make sure that they stay engaged and that you get their agreement to have some communications along the way, because that really is critical to getting everybody on board, particularly in such a decentralized environment. The other thing I would say, I'm just going to go kind of quick here because I'm going to make sure y'all got time for questions, is in the enterprise team, the readiness team, it's really important to have some folks who understand well the business today and what they struggle with today, so that you can really speak and kind of talk them off the ledge sometimes when they're so concerned about how different things might be with Workday. So myself, I've been here for 11 years. I designed the current HR system, and I have some other key folks on my team who they really trust and have a strong rapport with the stakeholders, and it seems to make really all the difference. And I'm going to rely on these key folks to get us all the way through go live to make everyone feel comfortable. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap my part up so that we can take some questions.
Thank you, Claire. All right, I think we do have some questions. Let me see if I can pull these up. It would help if I was using the right mouse. There we go. Rachel, can you pull those up?
I would love to pull those up for you.
Thank you. Hold with us 1 second.
Okay.
All right, first question. I think this is coming from the Ohio State University. It says, really enjoying the webinar and the great information. Has anyone had any success with other learning approaches beyond traditional classroom, job aids, etc., i.e. videos, business processes, help text? Also, are there any tips and tricks for updating materials based on the Workday releases twice a year?
I can, this is Rachel. I can pipe up a little bit about that. So my coworker, poor Sarah, has had to train the entire campus, and we're talking about a population of, boy, I don't even know how many users there are at this point, but we have about 40,000 employees, that's including student workers. So it's a very large population, and it has been very challenging to keep those quick reference guides updated. So very recently, we actually got another employee, and he comes to us from the world of education, and he has some great ideas about learning and videos. So yes, we are just starting to explore that, but I will tell you, keeping the screenshots on the quick reference guides updated is challenging. And to be brutally honest, people love doing things by rote, which is not how Workday works. You actually have to think about the bigger picture. So they would like quick reference guides on every iteration of anything. And that's not going to happen, but I appreciate the hustle.
And Claire, what about you guys? Are you planning other learning ways outside of the traditional methods?
Yeah, I mean, part of it too is once we get, so we've really prioritized what we need to get in place for Go Live. And there's some things, and that's really all about running that payroll. So there's some things that at the point we're going to go live, which is the beginning of November, that we'll have most of our students will already be employed. So we will do some student training, but when the rubber really hits the road is when they get to that point, say in December or late November, where they're starting to hire students for the next semester. Then that's where we're going to be sure that we have some of those targeted labs at that point, because that's the first time that they're doing some of those things. So some of the training too that we need to conduct, we don't need to do it day one. So we're planning it out to be later in the year to when they'll actually be doing some of those things. So that's helpful. The other thing I would say, we are not doing screenshots in our training materials. We are intentionally doing that because we know what a nightmare that would be to try to keep it up. And in terms of, we'll have an update right after we go live. So we're actually thinking that with our training materials, I mean, if there's something I really need to be sure they know, we'll just do a short, like, one-pager sheet that we'll insert or hand out in the classroom and post online for them to have.
I'll just add, this is Laura, that it's really important for your training organization to have a seat at the table when you're doing an update every 6 months. Because it's not just, I mean, obviously the configuration might change. You need to do regression testing. There's a lot to do on the functional side, but readiness and training need to be looped in on that because they're going to have some things to update on their side too.
Awesome, thank you. Rick also asked Rachel, what is your Cotton Bowl score prediction? Sorry, I can't resist. I love your sense of humor and creativity.
Well, Rick, I am also clairvoyant, so no problem. I'm on this. I predict a football team will win that is a division champion. And to be absolutely fair, I went to University of Washington, so my heart will always be with the Huskies because it's not just a body type, it's a way of life.
You're so silly. Kristen, do we have any other questions we wanted to get to?
So far, I have not had any more come in. We can give it a second. If there's anyone who does have a question, we would love to let our panelists share their insight with you, so go ahead and enter it either in the chat box or in the question box. We'll give it another minute or so, and then we'll go ahead and close out if none comes through.
This is Claire. Just another thing that's really helped us tremendously from a resource perspective is when we did our design confirmation sessions this summer, we recorded those and actually did some summaries of them, and those have been extremely popular. And that way we could put those out on the website and folks could access them whenever they wanted to. And so that helped us reach a much broader audience than we could actually have in the room. So posting things online is very helpful.
Yeah, it's a new way of life. All right, Kristen, I think we are right at time, so I will turn this back to you.
Okay, perfect. Well, thanks everyone for your time on today's webinar. We will follow up with each of you by email and include a link to a recorded copy of today's webinar so you can go back and listen again and get these great insights if you couldn't take notes fast enough. Thanks, and if you do have any questions, do feel free to reply back to that follow-up email and we'll be happy to talk more with you. Thanks and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.